Shavua Tov, a good week, a week of peace. What a few days it's been. It's been an amazing concentration of effort and devotion to community that has brought people out to give of their time and energy over a 2-day board retreat, which meant people left their children, their partners, to do 2 days of that. And then we've had a lot of people out last night and today. And so this is kind of the snuggly last part of this sweetness that we get together as a community. So good for you again for being here. You've given yourself a treat and a Shabbat sweetness that will take you into the week, because we're now beginning technically Jewishly the week. So sit back, do what you need to do in terms of turning stuff off and being present and coming fully into this place and giving yourself the treat of Rabbi Jacob Staub teaching for just a few minutes for you, for us, to take into, though. It doesn't end tonight. This is not a lecture that ends tonight. This is not a TED Talk. It's like, oh, that was interesting on the cosmology of the fantastic Aries alignment of the... No, this is something that, yes, it's a one talk, and you will take it into, hopefully, your lives, your conversations with people in this community and other communities about what it means to be Reconstructionists. So with no further ado, it's up to you.
Can you hear me now? Yes? Yes. All right. Hello again. The topic for this evening that was requested of me is, how are Reconstructionist communities distinctive, different from other liberal, inclusive Jewish communities? What makes a community distinctively Reconstructionist? The question is not uncommon. I get it a lot. What's the difference? What's the difference? Why is there a need for a Reconstructionist movement? I often hear the question phrased less delicately, like, why is there a need for a Reconstructionist movement or for Reconstructionist synagogues when Reconstructionist communities appear very similar, indistinguishable from other communities? You know, part of this question goes, Reconstructionism, we all are in its debt. It made a lot of major contributions in the 20th century, but there's no longer a need because we're all doing what you innovated 10, 20, 50 years ago. Like, thank you so much for introducing the bat mitzvah ceremony and in 1922, and women Torah readers in the 1940s, and counting women in the minyan in the 1950s. Thank you for the new Haggadah in the early 1940s. It was the first creative, interpretive Haggadah, but now there are dozens and dozens and dozens. We don't need it anymore. Thank you for showing us how to do new liturgy, how to take old ritual and make new meaning out of it, how to take out words and put in other words and put in other readings. But now we don't need the Reconstructionist Haggadah anymore. Thank you. Thank you so much for your vision in beginning to admit lesbian and gay students for the rabbinate in 1983. But now everybody's doing it. Thank you for developing in 1992 same-sex wedding ceremonies, but that's just passé today. Thank you for the extraordinary prayer book series Kol Hanshama, which is now being, which has been very influential in the development of other movements' prayer books, with a commentary, with a multivocal commentary where different interpretations are at the bottom of the page, and where transliteration is where people can use it in the middle of the page, and the way that Hebrew and English come together in the middle, and all the different things that you did. It was so visionary, but there's no longer anything distinctive about it. Everybody is doing it. And thank you for advocating, even before 1948, a new Zionism, a spiritual Zionism, for envisioning that Israel should have policies that embody Jewish ideals and values. Nobody was talking about that besides Reconstructionists in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, but now many, many people are talking about it. So, not an innovation anymore. Everyone, it is said, is caught up with us. We broke new ground, but now we are just like everyone else, and we're smaller, so what's the use? That's the question. That's the title. That is the long thing, is the subject of this talk. And here's my main point, which I will then elaborate. The main point is these contributions did not happen accidentally. It's not just we lucked out on some influential innovations. They arose and continue to arise out of an approach to Jewish life. They animate the approach that animates the way that Reconstructionist communities are structured and the way that Reconstructionist communities function. Others can adopt our innovations, but they don't replicate the culture, the theory and the structure and the practice from which these innovations emerge. So first a bit of background and then a lot of examples. Some of you probably know, and others may be less familiar, that Reconstructionism defines Judaism as the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people. And permit me to go to analyze that statement in several parts as an introduction to what follows. First, the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people. Peoplehood is primary. If you think about how an infant is acculturated, first you belong to your family, to community. Then you learn how to behave like people behave in your community. And then you come to believe what members of your community believe. But being part of a people, belonging, is first, is primary. Judaism, Jewish civilization, comes out of belonging to the Jewish people. Second, Judaism is a civilization, not just a religion. A religious civilization, yes, but it is far more than how we pray and what rituals we observe. There is a literature that's Jewish. There is music that is Jewish. There are customs about how to parent, about how to give tzedakah, about what to eat. There are political attitudes and so on. I could go on and on. Everything that a civilization is composed of, Judaism has that, and it is perfectly possible to be a full and complete Jew, I hazard to say, even if you don't believe in God and never enter into a synagogue, right? We are often fond of using the derogatory term bagels and lox Jews, or or you just have ethnic identification. But whether we approve of it or not, it is Jewish. Judaism, you can be a Jew who only reads about Jewish history. You can be a Jew on a secular kibbutz in Israel, or now we have secular kibbutzim of young Jews in Kentucky and elsewhere. You're Jewish. It's not just a religion. The definition of Judaism as a religion, as ethical monotheism, which the Reform movement defined it as in the 19th century, was on the Protestant model. How do we get emancipated and become part of the larger Western society? Well, some people are Catholics, and some are Protestant, and some are Jews, but we're all Americans, or all French, or all British. So we redefine Judaism to fit the mold of our contemporary circumstances, but Judaism is more than a religion, and it doesn't get fed. It traditionally does not grow and flourish out of one's beliefs and one's worship. It gets fed out of being part of a community with all of its civilizational aspects. And third, Jewish civilization evolves, has always evolved, continues to change and adapt to new circumstances. Chicken was once parv, now it's meat. Fish was once parv, it's still parv. And there are circumstances that make that happen. The bar mitzvah ceremony develops in the 15th century when confirmation of Catholic children moves from 8 or 9 to 14. Before that, the Jewish initiation ritual happened at age 6 or 7. Coincidentally, the surrounding culture, the Christian society, Catholic society, had confirmation at that age. So we are influenced by our surrounding culture. You would think that God commanded a bar mitzvah party at Mount Sinai, but it's not true. Jeremiah or Isaiah or Ezekiel's view of God is not like Rabbi Akiva's, and neither would be recognizable to the philosopher Saadia Gaon or Maimonides, and neither would theirs be recognizable to Kabbalists in the Middle Ages. Our beliefs evolve as we are influenced by surrounding culture. Maybe one more example. Lichtbenchen, lighting the candles on Friday night with Lahadlik Neir Shel Shabbat, the bracha that says we are commanded to light the candles of Shabbat, is an innovation from the 10th century, which was really an anti-Karaite polemic, because the Karaites didn't light lights on Shabbat, and the Rabbinites, the Rabbinic Judaism said, that's from Sinai. God commanded it. And so one of our most central rituals, right, comes about as a result of an intra-Jewish competition and conflict. And that doesn't make it any less powerful. If you light candles on Friday night and you identify with your parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and you bring in the light of Shabbat and your soul, that's fine. But that particular practice is only 1,000 years old. Right? Okay. And the point is, therefore, we have an obligation to continue to evolve, to continue to reconstruct. It is a mandate. It is almost a divine commandment that we can't stay still, we can't remain in place, because everything changes and we must continue to evolve, to survive, to flourish, to... All right, okay. Kehillat. Okay, so how does that work in terms of bat mitzvah or the prayer book series or all the other innovations that I listed? Okay, as I mentioned last night, I think that was the talk. The major change from pre-modern to modern Jewish society is you no longer live in a self-governing Jewish community that is governed by Jewish law and in which rabbis have the authority over you. And the question that Kaplan tried to address over and over again in his various books is, can Jewish civilization survive if we don't live in communities? Because the way that a civilization flourishes and grows and changes is in the context of a people, a community, a nation, whatever. You have to be an entity, a group. And if you're part of the larger secular nation of France or England or the United States or Canada, how can that work? And his proposal in our program is that we need to create living, vital, exciting, voluntarily joined communities. Participatory decision-making communities. Right? So in which you participate, but not just you get a reading to read on Rosh Hashanah or on a Friday night service, and not just by helping out the women's or men's club and getting together activities or on some program board. Also, you participate in making decisions in the life of the community. So, if you're trying to develop, if the community has to have a policy on what can and can't be brought in to the kitchen in terms of the dietary laws, in terms of kashrut, it's not something that a rabbi decides. It's something that the community or a sub-community, a ritual committee, a religious committee, studies and talks about for a year or two and comes up with a consensus decision. You study the rules, the laws, you study the midrash, the interpretations, you study about the development of communities and community dynamics, and what are the pros and cons? Do you want to have people cook at home and bring it in, even if their kitchens at home aren't kosher? Is it more important to have people be involved? Is it a matter of kosher ingredients? Is it a matter of just no pork or no shellfish? I mean, whatever it is, you learn about the reasons for everything, and then you come to a decision that then gets brought in some places to a plenary meeting, to the whole congregation to ratify. Everybody learns about it. And at the end, you have a policy that everybody has ownership over and in which everybody has learned about the dietary laws. And everybody can be proud of, whether they agree or disagree with the final decision, whether they were in the majority or the minority, they are part of a functioning community. Should the synagogue staff, to take another kind of example, spend more time on inreach, serving existing members, or outreach, trying to get new members? There's a lot at stake often for a community in that decision. Where should with the time, the valuable time of one's professionals be spent? On the one hand, you want to grow. On the other hand, you want to nurture people you already have. That is not a decision in Reconstructionist terms for the professional or other staff to make. It's a decision of thoughtful people in conversation, in discussion, and dialogue to make jointly, whether it is the board of directors or the outreach committee or however it is functioned. Laity, right? Non-rabbis, regular Jews participate in participatory decision-making communities, not because rabbis give them permission, but because it is their community. As an aside, right, as you may have noticed, Jews are extremely highly educated and are experts and professors and CEOs and professionals of all sorts. And when you walk into a synagogue, you don't lose those skills and those insights and that wisdom. And in a participatory decision-making community, your skills and training and wisdom get enlisted for the sake of the community, not as an aside. Well, I don't really know how to pray. I can't read Hebrew, but I am good at computer stuff. That's not the what you're good at. What you're good at is part of what you contribute to the community. So on many surveys that we've done, you ask people why they join Reconstructionist communities, and the number one reason is it's warm and welcoming. Right? None of the other stuff that I'm about to talk about. But the question is, why are they warm and welcoming? Are you welcoming somebody because you're a nice person? Well, yeah, I think Reconstructionists are nice and are good people. But if you have a stake, if you have ownership in the community, then you're welcoming someone not to somebody else's community. It is yours. You have that kind of ownership, and you are enthusiastic, and you're a participant, and you get a lot of respect and appreciation for your contributions to the community. It all comes out of peoplehood is primary. Decision-making community, participation in decision-making communities is the way that we are trying and often succeeding to create really warm and exciting places that other people want to join. So number 2 was warm and welcoming, and I'm done with that. So we'll go on to number 3. I think you know about warm and welcoming. I think you walk into this place, warm and welcoming. Right. So, because we no longer have self-governing communities, I mentioned this in passing last night, because we no longer have self-governing communities, you might call halakha the law, Jewish law, but it's not. Laws are things that are enforced. Excuse me. So, therefore, when we observe, and we're really interested in observing, and I remember in the late 90s there were 2 surveys, one of the Reconstructionist movement and one of the people in the conservative movement. It turned out we had a higher level of kosher observance than the conservative movement, not because we think it's the law, not because we think it's commanded, but because we embrace our traditions, however we do, and because we find meaning in them. So if you're going to observe and you don't think it's commanded, then you need to make meaning. And if it's not meaningful, you need to change it to make it meaningful. So things get changed as a necessity, not as a gift or as a concession. It's not a matter of doing all the prayers that are prescribed on Friday night for Kabbalat Shabbat because it's commanded. You want to create a meaningful, prayerful experience, and you start with whatever we started with last night, L'chadodi, I think, and you light the candles, and you, in the end, have a prayerful experience rather than covering every word in the Siddur. You know what's in the Siddur. You make choices about how to do that communally, in concert, and you have, therefore, a more vital, prayerful experience. If you're in a community, it's not a matter of there being a mitzvah, a commandment that you should visit the sick. Visiting the sick is part of what you do in a community, and many Reconstructionist communities have support system networks where you have, first of all, support groups for people in the sandwich generation who are dealing with problematic teenagers or young adults and parents, aging parents. You have a group that makes sure that meals are provided when they are needed for a variety of reasons. You have people driving each other to chemo treatment appointments if they need that. You have vocational retraining when people lose their jobs. You have people caring about each other not because they have to, but because they are part of a community. So the fact that halacha is no longer enforceable, to summarize this point, means that you do more, not that you do less. Right? We are not minimalist Jews. We are maximalist Jews, and we do them.
Yes. Yes.
Especially Rabbi Amy Bernstein. She does a lot. Okay. Number 4. Nice segue. The rabbinic role.
The rabbinic role.
Right. So what is a rabbi if not an authority of Jewish practice telling you what you're supposed to do? Right? So in this model, it is a collaborative model, a decision-making collaborative model, a collaborative model in connecting with people. It's a model in which rabbis are educated to respect you and to elicit the best from you and to value that because you are the essential members of the community, not the rabbi. The rabbi is important, very important, as a leader, as an organizer, as a teacher, but not as the authority. We know and we respect the fact that you're going to do what you're going to do both here and after you leave the synagogue building, and we don't say you should be different. We want to know what you need, and we want to know how to provide that, and we want to bring all of you together to do that in ways that are meaningful and life-giving and inspiring and exciting. And that's what rabbis are here for. 5, pluralism. Again, I've mentioned this somewhere on the course of the weekend. We don't all have to do the same Jewish things, right? And we don't all have to agree about what is legitimately Jewish and what isn't. We don't have to agree politically about what the right thing to do is. You know, in the 1980s, in the Reconstructionist congregations, some people wanted to declare the synagogue sanctuary for undocumented people who are going to be deported to places that they should not be deported to. And some people in those same congregations didn't think that the synagogue should break the law and risk the whole, risk everything by being sanctuary in the time of the 80s. And many synagogues decided to have groups in the synagogue forming sanctuary, declaring sanctuary, not the synagogue as a synagogue itself, not representing everyone, but just representing the people who were part of that interest group, people who are interested in doing so. And the people who were not interested in doing so supported the right of the people who wanted to do it to do it. There were legal issues, but it was they were worked out. Example, nowadays there are, in the Northeast, there's this thing called congregational-based community organizing, in which Jewish and Christian congregations work together for education or to combat poverty or various social justice issues, and the synagogue signs up. Again, synagogues are signing up not because everybody agrees that they want to do it, but because some people want to do it, and that's a Jewish thing to do for some people. Not everybody has to agree. Everybody has to agree that people should do things in a Jewish context, whether you agree with them, agree with that particular thing or not. There is, no reason why there shouldn't be both an APAC chapter of KI and a J Street chapter of KI. It's not, a community isn't a group of people, all of whom agree about everything. It is a group of people who are being Jewish together in a variety, in a diversity of ways. I love you. Okay, to say that we are an evolving, this is number 6 tradition, evolving religious civilization, means that we always look to make meaning and to revalue, in Kaplan's clumsy, to reinterpret, to find meaning, right? So you celebrate, you make a Passover Seder, and if the traditional Haggadah doesn't work to make you feel liberated or to be dedicated to freedom for all people, so you change the ritual. You keep it, but you change it so that it has a different, so that you can evoke the meaning of freedom and liberation, both internal and political, in the ritual. We have, the Reconstructionist movement has a website called ritualwell.org, and nowadays if someone says, Jacob, will you conduct a Brit for my granddaughter, a Brit Benot, a covenantal ceremony to welcome in my granddaughter, they also send with the email some ritual that they find on Ritual Well and say, will you use this particular ceremony? It's all available. We collect them, we edit them, it's an incredible wealth of material, and in the last few months there's a whole new section of ritual for transgender, the lives of transgender Jews. What do you do? What is the bracha and the ritual for transitioning? What is the way to mark putting on tefillin for the first time as a man, and so on and so forth. We are a movement that does not shy away from trying new things and from making meaning where there aren't meaningful ways of doing things. I mentioned that in the early 90s we were the first to say, hey, if you think it's all right for same-gendered couples to get married, let's construct wedding ceremonies that are like and unlike the ones that come down to us. We are the first in the early 70s to develop a ceremony for a covenantal naming ceremony for girls, the original baby girls, the original one by Rebecca and Joel Alpert and Dennis and Sandy Sasso was published before, I think in the first issue of Moment magazine in 1972 or 1973. We are ready to try new things. If you need something that doesn't exist, you look, you study, you are familiar with what rituals do exist, and you see how to apply them to unprecedented situations. And it's not only ritual. And here we look, moving a little bit towards the future. If it turns out that congregations are no longer the primary locus of Jews' identification in these new generations, if people are no longer joining synagogues, not because they're not interested in being Jewish, just because they're not interested in joining synagogues, you got to figure out how to reinterpret what a community is. You know, how does a virtual community work? How can you have e-lists? And I mean, I'm talking like I know something. I don't know what to do in the next generation, but people are working on this. How, if you're not all in the same room, can you be a community? We need to figure that out. And instead of bemoaning the membership numbers in synagogues, we need to figure out how to do that. We need to, do a little bit of what Hillel is doing, going where the Jews are to bring them in, but we also need to reconceptualize, because Jews are no longer living in areas of high concentration of being Jewish. We got to figure out another way to do it. everything continues to change, and we can need to evolve with new circumstances. If another example, if there are many, many communities today where people do not know what to do Jewishly because they remember their parents or grandparents doing these things. I remember my grandmother with a chicken over her head, before on Erev Yom Kippur. Most people. Yes. Okay, so I have a wealth of memories, Eastern European memories of how things work. Today, many people do not have grandparents who ever did those things, and many people don't have Jewish parents or grandparents. Given that, we need to revisit what Jewish identity is like. We have depended on nostalgia a whole lot. I feel Jewish. A lot of people don't know what that means. What it means they even want to be rabbis and they don't know what it means to feel Jewish. And we're working on it with them. We have labs and all kinds of ways of introducing them to new rituals. They know they love being Jewish, but they don't have the body knowledge, the childhood memory of that. And if rabbinical students don't have it, then I assume non-rabbinical students don't have it either. And we need to figure out what it means to be Jewish and how to express that and how to address it and so on. And for sure, this next generation does not want to be Jewish because the Holocaust and the establishment of the state of Israel. Thank God they are not traumatized the way previous generations have been, and they are not sure that the Holocaust is about to happen tomorrow in Pacific Palisades. It's not clear to them that they have to be on guard, and their view of Israel, which they have only known post-67 or post-73, is not as an embattled nation. And so all of the reliance that the Jewish community has made in previous decades in cementing Jewish identity by evoking the Holocaust and the embattled state of Israel doesn't wash in the same way anymore, and we need other ways of involving people in a commitment to their identity. We need to reconstruct some basic structures of thought and of identity that we have relied on for a long time. How can we be Jewish if it's not an ethnic thing? If you don't have memories of bagels and lox, if you don't know the smells of a challah baking, if you don't remember the Yiddish of your ancestors, what does it mean? It means a lot, but we have not, but there are a lot of born Jews of older generations who resist the notion that you can be a bona fide Jew if you don't have what they had, who resist change, who resist the need for ongoing reconstruction. Just a couple of more points. One, I can't do this without mentioning chosenness, the chosen people. It's not new, but it is central to all of our innovations and our approaches to Jewish life. Can you be Jewish if you don't think that being Jewish is better than being something else? Right? Is it possible to be proud without making the claim for superiority? We live in an open society. We marry in ever larger numbers people who are not born Jewish or people who are not Jewish at all. How do we relate to our colleagues, our friends, our family members, and how can we avoid the implicit superiority and chauvinism that saying that we are the chosen people engenders. I should say that traditionally that's not what the chosen people was all about. Traditionally, chosenness meant you thought the Torah was the best, the only, that we were chosen to receive the Torah and all of its obligations. That is not what most of us mean, because we have not accepted the Torah and all of its obligations anymore. So we end up counting Nobel Prizes to explain chosenness, that we are smarter, we are more innovative, that we are better. And that is not what chosenness was originally about, and is not a very, it's a real turnoff to generations today. Finally, and most dear to my heart, I guess most important, is participatory decision-making communities, but most dearest to my heart is that evolution, believing that Judaism evolves, frees us to acknowledge that many, many of our traditions, of our beliefs, and of our practices are unpleasant at best and objectionable, right? They were in their time. They made sense to other people. They don't have to make sense to us. We aren't tied to justifying everything that our ancestors believed and did. Kaplan wrote a book called The Meaning of God in Modern Jewish Religion, in which he revalues each of the holidays. I've mentioned Passover, but he has different values expressed by every one of our holidays. That's fine. But he also says that some things can't be revalued. So for some non-controversial examples, the treatment and the status of women can't be revalued. You can't apologize for it. You have to change it. The teachings in our tradition that say that there are 4 different kinds of souls: plants, animals, humans, and Jews. That we are species different than other people's is just not something you can throw into the washing machine and that comes out clean. You have to change it, right? We don't stone our disobedient children, right? There are all kinds of things you find in the... Stop, don't do that. And, husbands had the right to beat their wives in the pre-modern era if the wives didn't obey them, didn't do what they were supposed to do. It's like, you can find a lot of Jewish writing that says, oh yeah, well, but we treated women better, men treated women better than in other surrounding society. No. That's not good enough. There are things you have to change. And I run into this a lot in subtle ways, tikkun olam. There's a tendency in many places to say, oh yes, Jews have always been for social justice. Not true. Some were and some weren't. You need to acknowledge that in Poland in the 16th century, the community took care of orphans. And if an orphan girl came from a poor family, they gave her a poor wedding, and if she came from a rich family, they gave her a rich person's wedding. We were not in favor of egalitarian and communitarian values. We were interested, we were taking care of people, but in our own way. It's not that we have always been progressive in the way that we've been progressive today, and it's okay to acknowledge that and to say, and we're reconstructing that. It frees me not to have to apologize for every silly thing that a Jew has done over the course of thousands of years. And it frees us to move forward without feeling bad about betraying the legacies of our ancestors, because Judaism hasn't been perfect, and it's not God-given. It is human-created in an encounter with the divine, but it is, as I mentioned this morning, it is however divine it is, it's filtered through very human, imperfect beings, and we are part of the people, and we have that heritage, the part of the Jewish people. But it's okay. You can love your grandparents and great-grandparents even if you don't like everything that they did. You are still their grandchildren, but it doesn't mean that you have to do everything their way. So, because we are participatory decision-making communities, and because we believe in ongoing evolution, that needs to, and the imperative to adapt to ever-emerging needs, and not to apply old, how would that work? Old skins to new wine? I don't know. But not apply old strategies to new circumstances. We often are the first to take the first step into the unknown, into dealing with into new territory. Are our innovations, are our approaches always a home run? No. Most things that we try don't work. And some things work really well and resonate and spread from community to community and out of the Reconstructionist movement to other movements. I've mentioned a bunch of those. But as a historian, as someone who teaches Jewish history, I can assure you that most innovations and experiments and changes that Jews have done over the centuries, we don't know about because they didn't last, they didn't survive, because they didn't resonate. And it's okay. It's okay for us to continue to reconstruct and to continue to evolve and to try things until we find what really works. And that is part of what makes Reconstructionist communities different. We say tradition has a vote, but not a veto. We listen to the voice of tradition. We study the voice of traditions. We learn where we come from. But we are not tied to doing things the same way. And so we are free to do things that are outrageous in their time, that seem obvious to us 10 or 20 years later when it turns out all right. So I think I'll end there. Thank you very much for your attention.
So we'll take a few questions, not many because I know we're tired, but I will tell you, imagine what it is. That was 1 hour with him. What would it be to spend a whole year with him like that? Every day. An hour every day with that. And then you're supposed to go home and read this much. And come back the next day ready to talk about that and tell him what your questions are about that. And then he goes on this kind of thing again every single day for 1 year.
That's what you get.
This is what you get. This is what you get. Imagine what it is, the privilege it is to study with people like this. So to really do this, I'm not just saying this about Jacob or us or the movement. What I'm saying is, this is what it means to be engaged in Jewish life today. It's not about what do I do, what rituals do I do, what do I believe about God, what do I not believe about God.
I forgot
Did God
to mention
give my
God.
cousin cancer? This is what it's about. The level of discourse that's gone on for the last 2 days in this building, and then the board retreat another 2 days about what it means to engage community. It's so big and so amazing and so profound and so relevant. And I hope that you'll tell that to people. And Jacob's talk tonight is online. And you can just say to people, you want to know what Reconstructionism is about or what goes on with that? Let me show you a talk that I got right here on my phone. It's queued up. And if you want the link, I got it right here. It's queued up. Everything's queued up, Laura Diamond. You got it queued up, right? Of course you do. So you've got it ready to go so that people can understand that it's not what is Reconstructionism? What is God? It's about conversation. It's about engagement that brings our full selves forward so that we can really engage with whatever the world is dealing with right now. And we can bring ourselves and therefore a bigger community to bear on the conversation in a way that can really make it better. I know it sounds crazy. I know it sounds naive. But it's really what we believe, that what Rabbi Staub has articulated, why we study with him, why we come out adoring him, and the movement and Judaism and the tradition and the rabbis before us that I adored Gersonides. Who knew? Once you know that and you articulate that and it spreads, that's what we're trying to do. So if you have a question you want to ask of Rabbi Staub, we invite that. If you want to ask a question in general about what is this whole Reconstructionist business, why are we Jewish at all, what is like progressive Judaism, anyway, like any question you want, we're good. Bring it. Dana?
So I was thinking about college and the coursework that a Reconstructionist rabbi does versus the other movements. And so we get, Reform rabbinic interns here. And sometimes I listen to them and there's a tinge of something different. Like this morning we were talking about a predicate God. We've talked about that before in different classes. And someone asked what that was and it just hit home. It made me realize, or my question is, the 5 years they study, is it a little different from the other movements, a lot different from the other movements?
So the question is, what's the difference in how we study as rabbis in the Reconstructionist training program versus others?
Okay. We have just instituted a new curriculum reform, so I'm going to try and cover both old and new in general in answering the question. So there are several key components to the curriculum at RRC that are distinctive. First, we study the history of Jewish civilization as an evolving civilization. So first, you study what it was like in biblical times, and then in Talmudic times, and then in medieval times, and then in modern times, and you see the development of the rabbinate, and the development of the synagogue, and the development of dietary practices, and you see how they came about as a result of socio-historical circumstances that Jews lived in at their time. So your orientation to what is Jewish is conditioned by an evolving model. So you're never going to say Jews believe X. Judaism teaches X about Y. You're always going to, you might say it because you need to at a particular moment, but what you're thinking is, well, some Jews believe this in this time, and then they change their beliefs into that. And so your whole orientation is pluralistic and evolving. That's the first acculturating factor. Then we have a banner professional training, practical rabbinics program, where you learn how to implement many of the principles that I just outlined in practice. So you have a course in creative liturgy, or in life cycle events, or in homiletics, in which you learn how to, anytime I give an assignment that you need to do a Dvar Torah using medieval commentaries, if it's a medieval commentaries class, you need to tell the class who you are talking to and why you are making this point in this context. There isn't a single truth. It is you need to be talking to someone in context, addressing their need, some community, and addressing its needs. There isn't one drash, one Dvar Torah to give all purpose in all times and all places to all ages and all kinds of situations. So that's homiletics, pastoral counseling. Similarly, you get trained to be a professional, caring professional who who is adaptable, who is flexible, and that is in the professional training program. There is a heavy emphasis on learning the traditional liturgy and traditional ritual practices so that you can teach them and innovate from them, so that you can't let tradition have a vote, not a veto, if you don't know what tradition says. So you have to learn it, and a lot of our students take that very seriously and become more and more traditional in their practice, through their rabbinic careers, and then they go out and meet Jews in the real world, and then learn how to adjust and evolve and bring what they love into contexts as they meet them. So we are, and I guess the last point, there are many, I could go on and on about this. I was the academic vice president for 17 years and I have a lot to say about rabbinic training, but the last part I would say is that other schools have an idea of what a rabbi should look like and sound like, and they may not even admit this, but you can tell as people are emerging from them that they were all trained in the same way, to speak the same way. And we really value educating someone as they are to be the best that they are in their voice, in their style. Because we don't only train rabbis for congregations. Some of them are going into chaplaincy or into campus work or into JCC administrative work. And so we want to have difference not only in the communities that they lead, but difference in the community that they're a part of, and we model. So maybe this is one more little point. We have at RRC a participatory decision-making community. Nothing the faculty passes is final. It's all initial, and it goes for discussion to the student body to get student feedback and input into policy. So we model how to do this, and model humility and diversity and inclusion in everything that they do. There was another hand over? Yes.
Where do you see like the major changes going forward? You mentioned some of the new things being done, but in terms of like significant structural or content changes in Reconstructionist content.
Well, going forward, I don't know, but I can do recent past, right? Because going forward, it's a whole new world after the combination of the Rabbinical College and the Federation of Congregations, and there are all kinds of ideas I hear about how we are going to be bringing forth distance learning and interest groups online and in Skypes and those kinds of things. But I'd say one of the major changes both at RRC and then in congregations in the last decade has been in the area of spiritual practice. Used to be Reconstructionists were known as rationalists and didn't want anything to do with spiritual. That's not true anymore, and I'll be talking more about that tomorrow, but there's a lot of meditation sits that happen at 9:30 before the 10 o'clock morning service on a Shabbat.
Or 11:15 here every Friday in the chapel.
Right. Sorry, I didn't.
With me.
Right.
Just saying.
Many of our rabbis and lay people are training as spiritual directors, which means that they're very interested in contemplative listening and noticing where the holy and the mysterious shines forth in one's everyday life. And there is now a whole Tikkun Midot program that a number of congregations have adopted and that we are training students in which you have a midah, a virtue of the month, and you have a vad, a group that you are responsible to. You meet with 6 or 7 other people every month, and you have a partner, and you're working on a practice, that you take on to figure out how to take up more space or less space or both. It's a quality of humility, or to work on patience with someone with whom you find annoying. Whatever it is you pick about that midah, that virtue, you do that, and that will be coming out into the movement, I think, pretty directly because of the work that we're doing and have been doing recently about that. There is the identity issue that I just raised. The post-ethnic world in which we live is the technical way it's being described, right? Nobody's ethnic anymore. Identity is constructed, and you have multiple identities. You're not just Jewish anymore. You're Jewish and Buddhist and gay and whatever, all the various communities that you belong to. So what does it mean if being Jewish isn't linearly inherited from one's ancestors, and how does Jewish identity get constructed? And that's something that I hear a lot about because that's where we are at, right? So those are some of the things that come up.
Is Chavarim a concept from Mordecai Kaplan?
Chavurah, yeah, yes. Right, I didn't mention that. Thank you so much. What a good question. Not even planted.
We don't know for sure.
So if you are, right, before participatory decision-making communities, there were chavurot, and they're continued. In a congregation like this, the size of this, chavurot become really interesting and helpful to create sub-communities, because you can't be close with several thousand other people. You can be close with 10 other households and work that way. And yes, the introduction of the concept of chavurah was made by Kaplan and the Reconstructionists in the 50s and 60s before the chavurah movement. We don't get a lot of credit there. I don't know if we deserve it.
You never get any credit.
That's because, we don't need you anymore. You had a good idea, now we do it. But the first chavurah in the U.S., I think, goes back to 1959 in Denver. And the Denver Reconstructionist congregation is composed of chavurot even today, although they now have an option to just be a member of the congregation. But so it was put into practice in many places. It is now. Are we still being taped?
Yes.
I turn this off. So one of the things that happens to Reconstructionist chavurot is that they grow, right? And then they need a rabbi, because lay leadership burns out, and then the original members leave because they are a personality type that want to lead, not follow, and so the chavurah ends and becomes a flourishing congregation. That's a model that happens a lot. I don't know a whole bunch of chavurot that started small and stayed small. Whittier, yeah, there are a few. Any others that you know of? Linda? Sorry.
Over the years and the involvement that I've been with regard to JRF and RRC and so forth, the thing I found most interesting and important educationally, whatever, were the conventions that we had every couple of years where we met with members of other Reconstructionist congregations from across the country, changed different places, locations for these meetings. Is there any thought about bringing those back?
I think about it all the time. I love those conventions. I love those delegates and those floor debates and the sharing of resources. I think the reason that they stopped, they were suspended, is because it would take a whole office of people a few months to the expenditure of personnel time and stuff for the 3 or 4 days that several hundred people it just became costly in terms of what else we could do. I didn't make that decision. I didn't like that decision. I don't support that decision. But it wasn't because it was not important. It wasn't because people didn't think it was important. It was because it was a matter of prioritization, and that was a decision that they came to. It wasn't every other year. It was every year in the 80s, and then it became every other year, and then it got, but it was every year, and it was really intense and very wonderful. I agree.
I think identifying what the term chosenness is not, but is the term meaningful anymore? Does it have a use, and what is it if we're talking about chosenness?
Well, I personally try to avoid it. For people who are tied to Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amin, where we are chosen from among all the peoples for the Torah blessing, or the Alein, the wording, traditional wording in the Aleinu and elsewhere, what I say to them is, okay, just be careful what you mean by what you say, right? Because it is really easy, I think, to slide from an affirmation that we are the chosen people to a lot of thoughts and values that we all agree we shouldn't be feeling and valuing about the superiority of Jews and therefore the inferiority of other peoples. Kaplan's teaching, which I affirm, is that the people in every tradition are chosen to improve that tradition and to make it better. We don't make the claim, you heard me, I don't make the claim that Judaism is perfect and God-given and doesn't need to change. We have to continue to make it more ethical and more responsive and more inspiring, etc. And so does various branches of Christianity and Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism and any other religion. And so what I want to say is we all are jointly in a process of wrestling with our inherited and beautiful traditions and making them ever more godly. To say that Judaism is more godly than Christianity is just, it's not accurate and it's not helpful. It's like, I think, like one child saying they're more of a favorite of a parent than all the others. You don't, if you are, and it's my opinion, and I understand that not everybody agrees with me, but if I'm secure, I don't need to be best. I just need to be in dialogue with other people who are different than I am, and so that's what I would say. When I go to when I'm in a situation where I get called up for an aliyah, where I think nobody's ever heard of Reconstructionism, and if I said Asher Kervanu La'avodato, there would
Lots.
No, I would just take it would take attention away from the bat mitzvah or whatever reason I'm in that congregation. I say Asher Bachar Banu Im Kol Ha'amim, who has chosen us with all the other people, so that it's an affirmation of multiple chosenness. It's grammatically incorrect, so you wouldn't say it exactly that way.
That's
but
okay. What I want to point out right now, what just happened was Ruben asked a question that if I were coming to a group I didn't know, could sound like you're challenging my, I'm not saying you saw it this way, I'm saying what I learned from this is my beloved teacher, I know he's going to handle everything gorgeously and beautifully because that's who he is. His neshama's aligned, like always, to take anything anyone asks and turn it to
Don't
the
stop.
But it's so interesting that, like, Ruben, the question you asked, I know you, so I know what you meant by the question you asked. But had I been in another setting and heard that same question from someone I didn't know, I might have already gotten, like, kind of defensive and kind of like, well, what do you think I mean when I don't say that I think that I don't mean that and it's like I get all tangled and twisted around. And I think it's a perfect example for me of when we trust a teacher, when we trust somebody who's going to impart knowledge, it's not that we won't question what they say, but there's such an amazing openness of inquiry that's allowed, and an openness of trust that I can ask something that even might feel or sound transgressive that's allowed only in this space. So I want to tell you what you've created here tonight is important. It doesn't matter how big the audience is tonight. What's important for me is that Ruben could ask a question that Jacob, I knew, could hold, no matter what he thought about Ruben or this community or where he was coming from. And I want to encourage us to create more environments like that, that we can just say, I don't know where you're coming from, I don't know what the heck your issue is or your agenda is, but I can just for a second back down, like call the dogs off, back off, and just listen and be curious, as Rabbi Staub taught us today about. So is there another question for Rabbi Staub that someone needs to have answered? Margot?
Yeah, I was always led to believe, and you touched on this a little bit this evening, a lot, you touched on it a lot, that this was a lay-led movement, and I know that there's no longer the three arms of the movement. I just would like you to explain where the lay movement comes from now that
It's now entirely ruled by the rabbis, the movement. What we say is the law, the rule. There's no more lay anything.
Explain you were being ironic.
Well, I'm sorry, I missed what's going on.
So is it
I got
arms of
Margot's
collapse?
question.
So you can answer mine.
Okay. So it's the enterprise that we are, not me, but that Deborah Waxman and her 5 vice presidents and their staffs are working on. So there are all these commissions with mostly lay people on them. The outreach commission, I don't even know. I'm not. It's a lot going on, and there are an incredible number of phone meetings of these commissions, because we're a national movement, and so we can't bring everybody together. And when we were smaller, we had our annual conventions, and there's a plenum that meets by phone next week or 2 weeks that people have been preparing for weeks, in which issues will be discussed and policies will be made by representatives of all of the affiliates. And remember that the lay arm of the movement was mostly, the execs were mostly rabbis. So what you need, it's not a matter of rabbi or a lay person, it's someone who's paid for a full-time job and someone who is a volunteer. It's a good question. It's one that we think about a lot, and think about the efficiencies of how to do that. For me personally, because I'm not so involved in the infrastructure of that level of infrastructure in the movement, what's most important is that we are graduating, we are ordaining rabbis who have that in their bones. I am not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to talk to you and to bring my resources to you and to listen to you. And if we can keep that while the other stuff gets worked out, I think it'll be all right. There was...
Can I just add something?
Sure.
Not to toot my horn, but I know, but I've been involved in as you know, in the National Reconstructionist JRF affiliate arm, and as we organization as it currently is, and you mentioned all the different commissions, there are several, and they're all lay-led, with RC staff as implementing or helping the commission and committee people to implement. And I'm involved in one called Movement, Growth, and Financial something.
Prosperity.
Financial prosperity. The title kind of makes my eyebrows pull, but there are other things that other commissions, the community arm, the affiliate arm, affiliate.
There's an education commission, and there's a youth commission, and there's a, yeah.
Exactly. So, and they're all, many of us who were involved in these things as JRF members. So these things are still happening.
Thank you.
Different level, but it's still happening.
Thanks a lot. Yes.
Big, long, it's a long answer, so
Oh,
you're gonna have to think really carefully as to how to make it short, but, forgive me.
That's the meaning of life.
Forgive me if I'm showing my ignorance, but I am very, very frustrated with what is happening in Israel as far as the orthodoxy controlling how particularly women are treated religiously in Israel. How can we bring the ideas of are Reconstructionist rabbis even recognized in Israel, and how can we bring the ideals of the evolution that we've gone through to that country? Because I don't feel a connection with Israel because of those things.
When I go to Israel these days, I meet with like-minded people. You don't hear so much about all of the progressive organizations, but they are there, mostly in Tel Aviv. But they are there, and they are fighting the good fight. And so I think the way to do it is nobody's going to listen to us from over here about what they should do over there, but rather to learn from and collaborate and support like-minded organizations, the ones that are supported by the New Israel Fund. I'm not even going to mention specific organizations because I'm 63 years old and I don't ever remember names right. But if you are interested, I can certainly connect you, and I'm sure Amy can as well.
so I just want to close the story about that. So we were in Israel. Of course, you heard me talk at High Holidays about being in Israel. What I didn't talk about, what I didn't say, I'm not sure where I will tell the story, but you're getting it here tonight. Of course, the missiles and being in bomb shelters was one part of that story. The other one is that there are certain bus lines in Israel that are not desegregated. Women sit in the back and men sit in the front. And they are religious communities where men sit in the front and women sit in the back. And so Anat Hoffman, who is a champion of so many incredible progressive causes in Israel, including the women's agenda, the liberal Jewish agenda. She said, "I want you to go with me on a freedom ride in Israel when we went on our trip." So you heard me talk at High Holidays about my trip. I'm like, what the heck is a freedom ride in Israel? Like, I can get on the bus. What's a freedom ride? So she said, well, the law was that the buses, anyone could sit wherever they wanted, and then men started in ultra-religious communities, started sitting in the front and mandating women to sit in the back. And it became a real problem for women because they couldn't get their groceries and their children in the strollers up the back stairs of the bus. So they were having a hard time because no men were helping them because they were sitting in the front. So they were schlepping all the stuff up into the back, and they had no men then to help them deal with the children or the groceries or anything that they were dealing with. So it was a real problem. So 26 Orthodox women brought a case to the Supreme Court and said, they cannot make us sit in the back, can they? And the Supreme Court ruled, because it went from court to court, of course, like here, court to court to court to court to court. Where did the decision get made? Not in a religious court, in the civil Supreme Court of Israel. The decision got made, absolutely not. They cannot make you sit in the back of the bus. Absolutely not. But what are you going to do when you live in a certain neighborhood, right? And the men are on the front, and they're in their black hats, and they're intimidating. And you know what you have to do as their wife or their daughter or their granddaughter, you go to the back of the bus. So anyway, so Anat Hoffman, we were on our trip, and she said, I want someone to go freedom riding with us. And so what did Chaim say to me? You, Amala, Bubala, have to stay out of the way. If it gets dangerous, if it gets messy, you got to get out of the way. You got to duck. You got to get off the bus. You aim. You got to get off the bus. The son of Holocaust survivors is saying, like, I get what you're doing. I support what you're doing. But I know what can happen. My parents and my grandparents saw and lived what can happen when you make too much trouble. That's the one thing we're holding when we deal with Israel. Then the other was Anna Hoffman saying, I am a woman of this culture, of this society who says this is unacceptable. And these 26 women took this case to the Supreme Court. It went to the civil Supreme Court who said it's in fact discrimination to allow men to say women have to sit at the back of the bus. So all lines of buses must be desegregated. Okay, done. It's done. Order of the court. Do you think that actually happened? The Supreme Court says schools must be desegregated. Do you think that just happened? It took incredibly brave people to say, I'm going to go on the buses that won't desegregate and see what happens. So here, there's a point, I promise. So she takes us to the bus station, and I'm like, oh my God, Chaim says I have to run or something bad happens. But what she does is she takes us to the first stop where there's no one on the bus. And she took me and two other people, and we were having conversation, and she put each of us in a strategic place where men getting on the bus would have to decide to sit with us or go to the back of the bus. So it wasn't like we were breaking it. We were just sitting where we wanted to, but they had to. And so every person that got on the bus, we noticed as the bus went on, looked like this. Like they sized it up in 2 seconds. Like they looked over here, they looked over there. It's like, there are women sitting here, I don't want to sit. So where did all the men go? To that luggage place in the middle where the bus kind of moves and parts, because they weren't going to the back where the women are, God forbid. And they weren't going to sit where women were. So they went to that middle ground where the luggage lives, and the bus kind of moves and splits in half. So a woman sits down next to, this is my favorite part. A woman sits down next to me and she says, she wears a wig. She's clearly Orthodox. She knows that everyone's looking around. It's very tense. Everyone knows there's something weird going on because we're on the third, fourth, fifth now stop where people are getting on, assessing instantly, what do I do? And she looks at me, she says, and she just sits down, and I say, hi. And here, shalom. She says, shalom. And I look at her, and we're just kind of sitting there. She goes, אמרתי לך שלום? אמרתי לך שלום? את אמרת שלום, למה? את מכירה אותי? She says, you just said to me, hello, do you know me? And I said, no. She said, את אמרת שלום ואת לא מכירה אותי? You just said shalom and you don't know me? I said, yeah. She goes, are you sure? And like, you don't know me. So I took off my sunglasses and I said, אני חושבת שלא, I don't think so. And she goes, מאיפה את? בארץ. From where are you in Israel? And I said, אני לא מארץ, אני מארצות הברית, I'm from America, Los Angeles. And she said, wow. So we sat for a minute and she said, את לא מכירה אותי ואת אומרת לי שלום. You don't know me and you say to me anyway, shalom. hello. And I said, "Okay? Yeah." She said, "Atosa project po, nachon. You're doing movement project here, nachon." I said, "Yeah, we kind of are doing a." She knew that something was going on with Americans sitting in these places, and so I said, "Yes, actually, we are doing a thing here." And so we sat quietly, and she said, "את לא מכירה אותי ואת אמרת לי שלום. You don't know me, and yet you said to me shalom." So here's a woman, an ultra-Orthodox woman in a wig, who knows I'm now part of a sit-in on her regular bus. I've admitted that. And what she goes back to is, "You don't know me, and you still said hello?" And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "את יודעת, you know, Aaron Hodef Shalom." And I said, "I know, right? Aaron was known for being a pursuer of peace and wanting to make peace between." She goes, "את צודקת, you're right. How did you like?" And we started this conversation. She says, "וגם Hillel." And also Hillel in the Talmud knows this. And I said, "Betach." So I finished the sentence in Hebrew for her of what Hillel taught in the Talmud about like how one should greet somebody else. And she said, "Wow, we have a lot to learn from you Americans that come here about Drishat Shalom, about what it means to be ready to greet people with open arms and to say hi when we don't know them." So I went in assuming I was going to run, I was going to get stoned, I was going to get something thrown on me, and this is like what it opens up when, like Rabbi Staub teaches us, we can go into whatever the narrative is, whatever the lines that we think are drawn are, and just kind of go, okay, I have no idea what could happen, but if I say shalom, then I open up all kinds of possibilities. It's not naive. I was scared. We were being, we were under missile threat from Gaza. I'm not naive in saying that. I believe we as a people, we as a movement can live into what our teachers teach us, which is how to think about things in a way that leaves us open and ready to meet possibilities with the best possibility of wholeness and peace coming out of them. I want to thank you all so much for coming out tonight and for being here all weekend. And if you can imagine how you feel right now with oh, what's going on in my head? Every day for a year. Can you imagine that our heads did not explode? Means there's something about us that is I don't know, resistant to the incredible. So thank you so much for being here. If there's anything you ever want to ask, please know that we're going to put Rabbi Staub's talk up. Send it to other people. Let people know what you're thinking about. Let them know what you're asking, and write that, and we'll answer, and we'll figure out a way maybe for Rabbi Staub too. So thank you so much for being here. Go on your way. Shalom.
Thank you.